Hi, my name's not important right now. What matters is this. Last Christmas, my father told me not to come home. He said my brother-in-law didn't want a failure at the table. So I sat alone in a cheap diner while they passed mashed potatoes and called it peace. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they hadn't just excluded me that night. They'd been quietly erasing me for years, smiling, nodding, while handing me the knife every time. I thought I was protecting the family by staying quiet. Turns out they were counting on it. What happened next? They didn't see coming. Neither did I. The call that didn't need explaining. The microwave hummed while I leaned against the counter, scrolling through emails I didn't intend to answer. Leftover chicken, reheated for the second time, smelled faintly of rosemary, and something burned. Outside my apartment window, the sky had already gone dark, the kind of early winter darkness that settles in before you're ready for it. December did that in the Midwest. It arrived quietly and then stayed. I ate standing up, plate balanced in one hand, fork in the other. On the fridge, a small paper calendar held in place by a souvenir magnet from a conference years ago reminded me that Christmas was a week away. I'd circled the date months back, not because I was excited, more out of habit. Plane tickets were already booked. A small duffel sat half-packed near the door, socks and sweaters folded with the efficiency of someone who didn't expect surprises. My life was like that now. Orderly, predictable. I was past the age of needing much fuss, divorced, steady job, decent savings. The kind of man people described as easy, low maintenance. The one who didn't make things complicated. The phone rang while I rinsed my plate. I looked at the screen. Dad. He didn't call much. We texted occasionally. Short check-ins, weather, work, nothing urgent. Seeing his name made me dry my hands before answering, like that would somehow prepare me. Hey, I said. Hi, he replied. His voice sounded flat, careful. There was a pause. I could hear something in the background. A television, maybe. The sound of a house I no longer lived in. I wanted to talk to you about Christmas, he said. I leaned back against the counter, already knowing. Not the details, just the direction. Some part of me had learned the rhythm of these conversations a long time ago. Okay, I said. Another pause. He cleared his throat. It might be better if you didn't come this year. He said it like a suggestion, not a decision, like he was offering me an option he knew I wouldn't take. I didn't answer right away. It's not personal, he added quickly. We're just trying to keep things comfortable. Comfortable, that word again. He went on, explaining how my brother-in-law had concerns, how things had been tense lately, how everyone was under a lot of stress. He talked about peace, about not wanting anyone to feel awkward. Then he said it, plainly, without heat. He doesn't want a failure at the table. The word hung there between us. Failure, not angry, not cruel, just stated, like a fact everyone had agreed on ahead of time. I waited for my father to push back, to soften it, to say he didn't agree. He didn't. Instead, he said, I understand both sides. Both sides. As if there were two equal arguments. As if one side wasn't my absence. I realized then that he wasn't asking me. He was informing me. He never once said he wanted me there. Never said he'd miss me. Only that this was simpler. I thought about defending myself. About listing the things I'd done right. The bills I paid. The life I rebuilt. But I knew how that ended. Silence was how I'd survived this family. Silence was how I'd been allowed to stay. "Okay," I said. The word surprised even me. It came out steady. "That means a lot," he replied, relieved. "You're always understanding." We hung up without ceremony. No goodbye. No promise to talk soon. I stood there after the call ended, phone still in my hand, staring at the dark screen. The apartment felt larger somehow. Too quiet. The clock on the stove blinked 6:42. My packed bag caught my eye. The grocery list on the counter still had items circled in red ink. Cranberry sauce, bread rolls, things I wouldn't need now. I didn't cry. I didn't slam anything. I just sat down at the small kitchen table and breathed until the feeling settled into something dull and manageable. At some point, without thinking, I reached for my wallet. I held it in my hands, thumb resting on the worn leather edge, trying to remember why I'd picked it up in the first place. I set it back down and stood. That was the moment I realized Christmas would happen anyway, just not where I expected. Christmas didn't disappear. It just moved somewhere else. I'd driven around the block twice before finally pulling into the lot. A low-slung building with a glowing red sign that read, "Hartley's Family Diner." I'd passed it for years and never once gone inside. The kind of place that stayed open on holidays not for profit, but for people with nowhere else to go. Tonight, apparently, I was one of them. The parking lot wasn't empty. Couples, a few solo folks. One man walked slowly, holding a plastic grocery bag instead of a coat. It was cold. Mid-December in the Midwest never played nice, but I didn't rush. I watched my breath rise for a few seconds before heading in. Inside, the warmth hit me first, not just from the heating vents, but the glow of yellow pendant lights, the smell of roasted turkey, gravy, something sweet underneath. The buzz of clinking dishes and quiet conversation filled the air. People weren't loud. They weren't sad either. Just Wumbudi present. A teenage host in a red vest greeted me with the kind of smile that didn't ask questions. "Just one tonight?" he asked, scanning the list on his podium. I nodded. "Yeah, just me." He grabbed a menu, turned, and motioned. "Right this way." He led me past booths filled with families. A girl was feeding mashed potatoes to her little brother with exaggerated care. An older couple shared a slice of pecan pie between refills of coffee. Coats were draped over every chair. Everyone belonged to someone. My table was small, square, and pushed to the far side of the room, not near a window, not close to the center. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anywhere. It was the kind of spot you give someone who won't be staying long. I sat down, shrugged off my coat, and placed it on the extra chair, just to keep up the illusion for anyone watching. To my left, a man in his 70s flipped slowly through a newspaper, eyes barely moving. Across from him, a woman in a green sweater scrolled her phone with her elbows on the table. Neither looked up. No one waited on anyone else. I glanced toward the center of the diner again. A family of 6 laughed together. 3 generations. The father served ham to his daughter before passing the plate. Grandma dabbed at her eyes with a napkin after laughing too hard at something the teenage grandson said. They moved in rhythm. Spoons passed without words. Hands reached without asking. And just like that, I remembered something. There used to be a time, long ago now, when my plate had been filled for me too, when my name was called before dishes were passed. Over the years, that changed. My seat got shifted. My name came last. Then, not at all. Not out of malice, just adjustment. That's how erasure happens, isn't it? Slowly, quietly. A joke skipped over. A chair moved down the line. You don't even notice until one day you're no longer expected. Ready to order? A woman in her 30s appeared beside my table with a notepad and a kind smile. Yeah, I said, glancing at the menu for show. I'll take the Christmas dinner special. Turkey or ham? Turkey. She jotted it down, nodded. It comes with mashed potatoes, stuffing, green beans, and a roll. Dessert's pumpkin pie. No changes. That's fine. I didn't need to ask what it cost. Didn't need to substitute or rearrange. No one needed to weigh in. For the first time in a long while, my presence required no approval, no performance. The meal arrived quicker than I expected. Steam rising, gravy already poured. I picked up my fork and began to eat, slow and steady. It wasn't exceptional food, but it was warm, and it was mine. I glanced at my phone. Nothing. No texts, no missed calls, no vague thinking of you messages. I let the phone face down on the table. I wasn't missed because I wasn't expected. I didn't need to argue for a place. I'd been quietly deleted from the list long before the call ever came. After the last bite, I sat back and let my hand rest on the table for a while. I wasn't in a rush. The server returned, slipped the receipt into the black leather folder, and smiled again before leaving. I opened it, saw the total, and pulled out cash. Before sliding it inside, I paused, then folded the receipt carefully and tucked it into my wallet. Not for record keeping, not out of sentiment, just because. Coat back on, I walked through the same path I'd come in. The family at the center was still mid-story. The older man was asleep over his folded newspaper. The woman in green was gone. No one noticed me walk past. I stepped outside into the cold and thought, I paid for my seat. That didn't mean I belonged. I stepped out into the cold and walked back to my car, not in any hurry. The engine turned over slow, reluctant, like it had something to say about being asked to work on Christmas Eve. I didn't go straight home. I took the long way, passing quiet houses strung with lights and inflatable snowmen swaying a little in the wind. In more than a few living rooms, I could see silhouettes moving behind curtains. Laughter here, a toast there. I wasn't jealous. I just noticed. When I finally got back to my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and left my coat on the back of a chair. Didn't turn on the TV. Didn't check my phone. I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up late. The kind of late where you don't even look at the clock because you know it doesn't matter. No alarm. No one waiting. No reason to rush. Sunlight filtered in through the blinds. And for a second, I forgot it was Christmas. It just felt like any other winter morning, quiet and still, like the world was letting out a long breath. I got up and made coffee. Same brand I always bought. Same mug from the office Christmas party 5 years ago, the one with a cracked handle I never bothered to fix. I drank it standing in the kitchen, looking out the window at the same parking lot, the same bare trees. The only thing different was the feeling, like the day had skipped a beat, like it had gone on without me. No texts, no calls, not even a group message. I wasn't surprised. I just noticed that too. I put on a sweatshirt, grabbed my keys, and went out for a walk. The streets were quieter than usual, but not empty. A few kids were out trying new scooters, their parents watching from porches. I passed a neighbor unloading wrapped gifts from the back of his SUV. We nodded at each other. No words, just a look that said, "Yep, this is the day." As I walked, I didn't feel bitter. I felt awake, like something had been pulled back, and I was seeing things without the usual filter. At the corner, a little girl in a puffy pink coat shouted, "Watch me!" before racing her bike down the sidewalk. Her grandfather laughed from the lawn, clapping slow and proud. It was sweet and simple, and it hit me harder than I expected. I started thinking about the table, not the one from last night, but all the others before it. The Thanksgivings where I was asked to serve before sitting. The birthdays where my gift was the one passed over first. The dinners where I wasn't asked how my day was, but I always made sure to ask everyone else. It wasn't a single thing. It was a pattern, not mean, just dismissive. And for the first time, I allowed myself to call it what it was. Not accidental. Not just the way things went. A system. A setup that required someone to go along quietly so it could keep working smoothly. I used to think I was being helpful by staying out of the way. Now I saw it for what it really was, being made small on purpose. I turned the corner and slowed my pace. I thought about my dad, about all the times he said, "Let's not make this a thing," or "You're always so understanding." I used to take that as a compliment. Now I saw it as a script, one designed to keep peace on the surface while letting everything underneath rot. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Silence did the work for him. And that was the most painful realization of all. His silence wasn't confusion. It wasn't helplessness. It was choice. He had picked his comfort over my place at the table over and over again, and I had let him. I kept walking until the wind started to sting my ears. Then I turned around. By the time I got home, the coffee had gone cold in the pot. I poured it out and rinsed the carafe. My phone buzzed once, a promo from a store I'd forgotten I signed up for. Nothing else. I sat at the table, same place I drank my coffee that morning, reached for my wallet out of habit, opened it, saw the folded receipt from the night before. I didn't pull it out, didn't need to read it again. Just knowing it was there was enough. I sat with that feeling for a long time. And that's when I understood something had to change. Not loudly, not yet. 2 days after Christmas, the quiet had gone from comforting to sharp. I'd been carrying it like a coat I wasn't ready to hang up. But that morning, I sat at the table, stared at my coffee going cold, and realized something was shifting inside me. Not an explosion, just a slow tilt, like a picture on the wall coming unlevel. I reached for my phone and dialed my father. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, son," he said, voice soft, familiar. It struck me how easy he made it sound. Like nothing unusual had happened. I didn't clear my throat, didn't rehearse. I just said it plainly. I wanted to clear the air. A pause. "Sure. Yeah," he replied. I was thinking the same. We tiptoed through small talk. The weather, work, nothing with edges. Then I said it, steady as I could. "I need to say something, and I'm not blaming anyone, but I won't sit at any table where I have to be pre-approved to exist." He didn't respond right away. I gave him space, not because I was afraid, because I didn't want to be misunderstood. "I'm not okay," I added, "with being treated like the risk everyone quietly manages." Dad took a breath, then let out a light chuckle. "You're taking this the wrong way," he said. "Nobody meant to hurt you." There it was, that soft, familiar dodge. I felt it land like a dull thud in my chest. "No one meant to," I repeated, "but it happened." "I just don't want things blown out of proportion," he said, "especially not over one dinner." That's the thing, I said, my voice still level. It wasn't just one dinner. It's never been just one. Another pause, this one longer. I'm not angry, I said, but I'm also not going to keep acting like this is okay. If being around means shrinking myself to make others comfortable, I'd rather not come at all. I let that sit. I could hear him shifting the phone, maybe sitting down, maybe wishing I hadn't called at all. Well, he said finally, we all have different sensitivities. Dad, I said gently, this isn't about me being sensitive. It's about being erased in slow motion. I think you're making this bigger than it is. No, I said. I think I've just stopped making it smaller. That was the moment. The real line crossed. My first real boundary, spoken, not just felt. We didn't argue. He didn't yell. But when we hung up, I knew I hadn't been heard. Not really. The call ended with a polite, "Take care," like he was ending a customer service chat. I stared at the phone for a while after, thought about calling again, explaining more, softening the words. That old reflex. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped outside to take a walk. The cold nipped at my ears. A neighbor's kid was building a snowman, red mittens flailing as he packed the snow too tight. Laughter echoed from across the street. Somewhere, Christmas music still played faintly from a garage radio. When I got back inside, there was a voicemail. It wasn't from my dad. It was from Lisa, my cousin, the family's informal messenger. "Hey," she said in that sing-song way meant to sound breezy, but wasn't. "Just wanted to let you know there's talk going around that you're, still upset about Christmas. I think people are feeling like maybe you made it about yourself. Anyway, I know you're probably processing. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Hope you're doing okay." I played it twice. Made it about yourself. That stuck. They hadn't heard me. They'd reworded the whole thing. Now I was the one ruining the holiday. Now I was the one holding grudges. That was twist S8. The moment I saw the boundary I set reframed not as self-protection, but selfishness, I opened my messages, started typing something, stopped, erased it, typed again, deleted again. I knew where this would go. They'd reply with calm deflections, polite dismissals. Someone would say, "We're all doing our best." Another would chime in with, "You know how family is." And I'd be right back where I started, explaining myself to people who already decided the problem was me. No. I closed the messaging app, sat back, looked around my apartment like I was seeing it for the first time. I glanced at my wallet on the counter, walked over, picked it up. My fingers moved before my mind caught up. I opened it. There was the receipt, folded, tucked away. I didn't unfold it, just touched the edge. Still there, still mine. I didn't know why I kept it. Not yet, but I would. The days after Christmas felt like walking underwater. Everything looked the same, but moved heavier, slower. When the first work week of January rolled around, I stepped back into my office like someone sliding into an old coat that didn't fit right anymore. People smiled in passing, offered those generic greetings only meant to fill space. "How was your Christmas?" I gave the same answer every time. Quiet. Nobody pressed for more. Nobody ever does when you sound calm and vague. The truth is, work became a kind of shelter. The rules were clear there. Deadlines didn't ask how you were feeling. Meetings didn't reframe your hurt as a misunderstanding. In the office, I was a professional, useful, expected, seen. But at night, when I came home and the silence was my own again, the questions crept in. Had I overreacted? Was I too sensitive? Had I misunderstood my father's tone or read too deeply into words said under the guise of keeping the peace? I replayed our phone call in my head, his voice, my words, the long, empty pause after I told him I wouldn't show up just to be managed. Maybe I should have phrased it differently. Maybe I should have waited until after the holidays. Maybe I should have said nothing at all. That's when I started drafting a message in my head. Something simple, gentle, like, just wanted to say I'm not angry. I'll be keeping some space for now, wishing everyone well. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about stepping back before I vanished completely. That was twist S9, the quiet resolve to walk away, not out of spite, but survival. I didn't send the message. I saved it as a note, closed my phone, tried to sleep. 2 nights later, just as I was shutting down my laptop after a late project, my phone buzzed. It was a name I hadn't seen in months, Aunt Margie. We weren't close, but she was the kind of person who remembered birthdays and sent forwarded prayer emails with blurry gifs. Her message read, "Hey there, just wanted to say, I heard there's been some tension. I don't know the details and I don't need to, but I hope you know nobody meant to make you feel excluded. Your dad probably didn't know how to handle it. And, well, your brother-in-law, you know how he is. Anyway, thinking of you, hope you're okay." That was twist S10, the moment I almost let it all slide again, because for a second I felt it, that pull towards smoothing things over. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe they did mean well and just didn't know how to say it. It would have been so easy to lean into that version of the story, but then I sat with her words. Nobody meant to. He didn't know how to handle it. You know how he is. Excuses stacked like sandbags around the real issue. I stared at the message, then whispered the words aloud. They weren't asking me to forgive. They were asking me to disappear. That line didn't come from anger. It came from clarity. For years, forgiveness in my family had meant forgetting, letting things slide so others could stay comfortable. If you brought up pain, you were the problem. If you set a boundary, you were being difficult. This time, I didn't want to disappear. But I also didn't know what came next. I felt stuck, like I was standing in a hallway between 2 locked doors. One said, "Go back to how it was." The other said, "Walk away completely." And neither one opened when I reached for the handle. That night, I didn't draft a new message. I didn't reply to Aunt Margie. I didn't do anything at all. I sat at my table, the same spot where I drank coffee, made calls, and unlearned how to apologize for existing. My wallet was there, next to my phone. I picked it up, opened it, pulled out the receipt from Christmas Eve. This time, I unfolded it. The total was still circled in blue ink from when the waitress handed it to me. $24.80. One Christmas dinner, alone, paid in full. I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper. Still didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. I folded the receipt and slid it back into my wallet like I was placing something back on a shelf. Not sentimental, just unfinished. Then I exhaled, that quiet, heavy kind of breath that doesn't really clear anything. The next morning, I didn't check my phone. Didn't need to. Mid-January brought a kind of gray that matched my mood. Sky always overcast, streets half frozen, neighbors leaving for work in silence, shoulders hunched against wind that wasn't sharp anymore, just tired. I matched that energy. At work, I kept things simple. Showed up, did the job, said yes to the projects no one else wanted, If someone asked about the holidays, I said they were peaceful and kept walking. There was a comfort in that distance, no expectations, no performance. And for a while, it worked. No calls from my father, no messages from anyone else. Just silence, the kind I had once dreaded, now welcomed like an old friend who didn't ask questions. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be enough. That space would calm things down. It didn't. The first crack came from a coworker. We were in the break room, waiting on the coffee machine to finish its slow drip. "You doing okay?" he asked, like it wasn't just small talk. I nodded. "Yeah, just the usual January fog." He hesitated. "It's just, my wife ran into your sister at the market. She mentioned you hadn't come for Christmas." I froze mid-sip. He went on, cautious. "Apparently people are asking questions. Questions. Not concern. Not, is he all right? But, why wasn't he there?" That was the moment I realized my absence wasn't a quiet act. It was an inconvenience, and apparently, it needed explaining. A day later, the narrative surfaced in full. I got a text from a mutual acquaintance, someone who floats around both social circles and family gatherings but belongs to neither. The message was simple. "Hey, just thought you should know. Some folks are saying you're having a rough time, that you've been distant, maybe taking things personally, that you've always been a little, sensitive." Sensitive. The word hit me harder than I expected. That wasn't a descriptor. That was a dismissal. And the people saying it, they weren't strangers. They were the ones who had once called me to help move furniture, asked for advice when their kids were choosing colleges, sent holiday photos with my name on the card. Now they were rewriting the story in my absence. Twist S12 didn't scream. It whispered behind closed doors. He's struggling. He took things the wrong way. He just needs time. I wasn't just being excluded anymore. I was being explained. Later that week, I got a voicemail from my cousin Kevin. We hadn't spoken since last 4th of July, when I helped him unclog his pool filter, and he thanked me with warm beer and half a hot dog. "Hey, just checking in," he said, voice too casual. "Listen, maybe you could give Dad a call. He thinks it'd help clear some stuff up. Folks are talking and, well, you know how people get." That was it. No, "How are you?" No, "We miss you." Just a request to manage perception. Twist S11 clicked into place with perfect clarity. My silence wasn't peace to them. It was a threat. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, phone in my hand, Kevin's message still sitting in my voicemail, untouched. And I realized something. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't wondering if I was too harsh or too soft. I was done negotiating my absence. If they were going to tell my story, I thought, I'd decide when it ended. No more explaining. No more justifying. I didn't reply to Kevin. Instead, I opened the group message thread I hadn't touched in weeks, the family thread, full of forwarded recipes and blurry pictures of nephews at school plays and jokes that hadn't been funny in 2003. I didn't write anything. I just scrolled. Watched who was posting, who wasn't. Read between the lines. The tone had shifted. There were small, pointed phrases. Some people don't appreciate how hard it is to host. Boundaries are fine. But family is family, and the one that sealed it, we've always tried our best. Always. Tried. Best. All words that leave no room for accountability. I put the phone down, looked at the table. The wallet was still there. I reached for it, opened it, pulled out the receipt. It didn't make me feel strong. but it reminded me I was real, present, accountable, to myself. I folded it once more, not as a keepsake, as a marker. The next step wouldn't be quiet. It would be deliberate. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the couch longer than I planned, feeling the weight of the silence around me. Not the empty, comforting quiet of early January, but a different kind, one rich with intention. I knew something inside me had shifted, and it wasn't going back to tiptoes and polite responses. I made coffee and moved through my apartment with a slow, methodical pace. No flutter of panic, no urge to respond right away. Just clarity. At work that morning, I realized the conflict wasn't about Christmas anymore. Not really. It was about the story they wanted everyone to tell about me. The image they had grown accustomed to controlling. They feared exposure more than confrontation. And that was important. I stopped drafting responses, didn't open the family message thread. I just watched, observed who texted, who didn't, who said, "Hope you're okay," with genuine concern, and who said it in that flat, automatic way families sometimes use when they want peace more than truth. It was revealing. Messages were urgent, yes, but accountability was nowhere in sight. It confirmed what I'd been sensing. They needed me to stay quiet, not present. There was no shouting, no dramatic moment, just a slow realization. The opponent's weakness wasn't strength or logic. It was dependence on perception, the idea that if their version of events held up, no one would question it. That fear of people seeing the real story gave me something they didn't expect. So I made a decision, quiet, but irrevocable. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't explain. I would choose the moment and the method, not shout into a chorus of half-hearted apologies and whispered excuses. It felt like finally untying a knot I'd been wearing for years, not in rage, but in resolve. Later that afternoon, while rearranging books on a shelf, I saw the folded receipt again. It wasn't a relic of pain or nostalgia. It was a reminder, a marker. I thought about how I paid for that dinner at Hartley's family diner all alone. No drama, no speeches, no expectations. I paid, not to disappear, but because I had a seat to take in the first place. I didn't reread the paper. I didn't need to. Instead, I said to myself, almost aloud, I paid once to be invisible. I wouldn't do it again. It wasn't self-pity. It was reflection, grounded, without bitterness. The echo was there, but it no longer pulled me backward. It pointed forward. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, my phone buzzed. A message from one of my cousins popped up, short, casual, like dropping a pebble into a still pond. Hey, trying to finalize plans for a family get-together. I know it's short notice, but thought you should know we're all gathering next weekend. Hope to see you. No apology. No attempt to acknowledge the tension. Just an assumption that I'd either show up quietly, like the man who once sat at their table, or disappear politely, like someone who had nothing to say. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. This wasn't an invitation. It was an expectation, a test. They didn't expect resistance. They expected compliance. That's when I understood fully. My absence had become a blank space they were desperate to fill with their own narrative. So I didn't type a quick maybe or I'll think about it. I sat with the message, let it hang there, face up on the table. Then I made another cup of coffee and opened the drawer where I kept important papers. Not bills, not old notes, just documents I'd put aside for reasons I couldn't articulate until now. I pulled them out, spread them on the kitchen table, and began organizing them, tax forms, work contracts, letters of appreciation from colleagues, and yes, a few old emails from family members thanking me for helping with a move, or a repair, or a holiday meal. The kind of things that anchor a man in the real world. Tangible history, not the stories they were now spinning. I didn't write a response. I didn't take a step back. Instead, I prepared. Prepared my thoughts, my facts, my boundaries. The narrative I knew was true, not the one reimagined in group threads or whispered at backyard barbecues. It wasn't theatrics. It was strategy, controlled, quiet, precise. I set my phone face down on the counter, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt ready, not to fight, to assert, not to be misunderstood, but to be recognized. I didn't doubt my choice, not for a moment. They thought I wouldn't show up. They were wrong about what that meant. They expected silence. What they got was absence, with intent. I didn't dress for the event. I didn't even check the time it started, but I knew exactly when it began, because around that moment, I felt something in the air shift, like pressure dropping before a storm. The day itself was unremarkable. I ran errands, cleaned the kitchen, took out the trash. It was a quiet Saturday in early February, with brittle sunlight leaking through the blinds and the hum of a neighbor's vacuum cleaner upstairs. Nothing dramatic, nothing ceremonious. And that was the point. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need to show up to prove a point. That would have been playing their game on their field. My choice wasn't about drama. It was about consequence. I knew they were expecting me, not because they missed me, but because they counted on controlling how my presence was handled. A nod here, a polite photo there, a carefully worded post about family all together again. They had always relied on me to be manageable, palatable, a shape they could move around the room and pose however fit best. By not going, I disrupted the script, and sure enough, the cracks appeared fast. A text came from an old friend of my sister's, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, I heard you couldn't make it tonight. All good?" Then another message from a former coworker. "Your niece looked confused tonight. They said you were working through stuff. You okay?" And then silence from the people who mattered most. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By removing myself, I forced them to tell a story without me. And without me there to absorb, apologize, or smooth things over, their version unraveled quickly. Some guests were told I was traveling for work. Others were told I'd chosen not to be involved. One even heard I'd had a health scare. Fabricated, of course. It was like watching a play fall apart mid-scene. Everyone improvising, but the lines didn't match. No consistent villain. No clear excuse. Just discomfort and contradiction. Around 8 p.m., my phone rang. My father. I let it ring. A few minutes later, another call. This time from my sister. Then a third, from a number I didn't recognize but knew was a borrowed phone from someone at the gathering. I sat in my chair, calm. Not smug, not cruel. Just grounded. They weren't calling out of concern. They were calling because their structure had buckled. My absence created questions, and they hadn't prepared answers. They expected to manage me. They didn't plan for autonomy. I reached for my wallet, opened it slowly, and took out the folded receipt I'd carried since Christmas Eve. It had creased at the edges, the ink slightly faded, but the numbers were still clear. $18.62. A dinner alone. Quiet. Unremarkable. and yet loud in a way nothing I'd said could ever be. This, I thought, was the cost of staying quiet. It wasn't about the money. It was what I gave away with it. Visibility, dignity, space. That night, I had paid to disappear. Tonight, I'd stayed silent to be seen. I folded the receipt again, this time carefully, not as a wound to carry, but as a line I had crossed, and wouldn't uncross. Later that night, more messages trickled in. One from my cousin. Maybe next time, yeah? Another from my brother-in-law's sister. Heard you're still upset. Hope it's not about something silly. And finally, one from my father. It read, "Let's talk when you're ready." But I wasn't waiting anymore. I hadn't been waiting for days now, maybe years. Their words didn't sting. They didn't pierce. They barely landed because I knew they weren't rooted in reflection. They were attempts to recapture the old dynamic, to lure me back into a role that made their version of family feel intact. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to grovel. I needed space that wasn't conditional, so I gave it to myself. The night closed gently. No fireworks, no final argument. Just me, sitting on the couch, cup of tea in hand, while the city outside blinked through windows and headlights swept softly across the walls. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I didn't feel alone. I felt intact. They finally understood I wasn't waiting for permission. The messages slowed to a trickle, then stopped. Days became weeks. The tension that once buzzed under every conversation faded, not because it had been resolved, but because it had nothing left to feed on. It was late February when I realized I hadn't thought about them in 2 full days. Not in anger, not in mourning. Just hadn't. There was no explosion, no final door slam or dramatic confrontation, only quiet. The kind of silence that follows a decision you didn't announce, but held to, every day after. Family group texts still existed. I still saw my name pop up now and then in photos or updates that didn't ask for a reply. Polite, passive notes like, "Hope all is well," or "Saw this and thought of you." And I let them float past. They didn't come with strings anymore, just echoes. I wasn't angry. That part surprised me. I thought there might always be a low throb of resentment, something sour that would rise whenever a birthday or holiday came up. But it didn't. Instead, there was space, real, breathable space. What didn't happen? There was no sit-down conversation, no tearful reconnection, no, "we finally get it now." That moment never arrived, and eventually I stopped expecting it. What did happen was simpler. No more assumptions about where I'd be. No more pressure to smile through things that weren't funny. No more jokes at my expense disguised as just how we are. The volume turned down not because anyone apologized, but because I stopped playing the music. They didn't change, I realized one morning as I sipped coffee at my window, but they stopped reaching for me. That was enough. I began to see family differently, not in rejection, but in reality. I still believed in love, but love without safety isn't really love. I still believed in belonging, but not if it requires me to vanish piece by piece to fit. I'd spent years in rooms where I was only welcome if I made myself smaller, if I didn't mention the things that hurt, if I didn't name what was missing. That wasn't family. That was performance. And I was done auditioning. I didn't paint anyone as monsters. They were people. People stuck in patterns, just like I'd been. That's the hardest part to explain. How you can walk away from people you don't hate, but love doesn't always mean staying. Weeks after the last message, I cleaned out my wallet. Old receipts, expired coupons, business cards I hadn't touched in years. At the bottom, folded into the corner pocket, was the one from Christmas Eve, $18.62. A single dinner at a restaurant full of strangers. I held it for a moment, not with sadness, not with pride, just stillness. Then I tossed it in the trash. No ritual, no ceremony, just the end of a chapter. The cost was paid. The memory acknowledged. I didn't need a token anymore. That night had shaped me, but it didn't define me. From then on, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't chase invitations. I wouldn't explain why respect matters. I wouldn't perform toughness for people who refuse to hear truth spoken quietly. If someone saw that as cold, that was their lens. I no longer borrowed their glasses. Some days were lonelier than others. But loneliness in truth was better than company in erasure. And now I want to say this to you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. If this story sounded familiar, it's because it happens more than we admit. Maybe not in the exact way. Maybe it's not your brother-in-law or your father or your holiday dinner. Maybe it's your adult child, your sister, a friend, a marriage that quietly emptied out. But the feeling's the same. That slow drift where you start editing yourself to stay invited, where silence becomes the cost of inclusion, where you begin to wonder if you're crazy for noticing things no one else admits. You're not. Sometimes the most honest thing we can do is walk away, without slamming doors, without demanding others follow, just choosing truth over comfort. That's what peace actually looks like. It doesn't always come with applause. It doesn't wrap itself in bows and closure. Sometimes peace looks like a quiet room, a clean wallet, a cup of coffee without anyone to impress. I wasn't uninvited from Christmas. I was released from pretending. I didn't lose my place at the table. I learned when to build my own.